So I'm going to breeze through radio communications because this is one of the courses that you'll need to take through base medical. So I'm going to highlight just the JSAR stuff here. So we trimmed down the slides considerably. So if they seem a little jumpy, that's why. So first, ignore the first point there. The second point here is kind of important. We have both VHF and UHF radio frequencies in this county. Fire is on VHF and law enforcement is on UHF. Radios that we use, that we carry in search and rescue, with some limited exceptions, only work on one or the other of those bands. So the radios we carry work on VHF. They do not work on UHF. We can't talk directly to law enforcement on the channels. Everyone else, though, is on VHF. Fire, the Forest Service, the Park Service, most of the ham radio around here, it's all on VHF. So our radios are well suited to talk to everyone except directly to the law enforcement partners that we work with. They get around that. So they have dual band radios they can talk on our SAR frequencies is the main workaround. Another limitation that we have simplex radios, and I'll describe a little bit what that means. You'll get more of this in that base medical course. Simplex means one radio is talking directly to another radio. There is no tower involved. There's no repeater, which would be on the tower, retransmitting your signal. The portable radios that we have transmit with 4 watts of power. The ones in our vehicles transmit with 40 or more. Even our vehicles, at the most, we're going to get 20 miles of range, and in the mountains, we're going to get a couple miles of range. Simplex radios have limited ability to go through things. They can't go through rock. They can bounce off rock a little bit, but they can't go through a ridge. They get bogged down a little bit just in trees, much less more substantial obstructions. So that's a limitation we deal with on every call. Even this most recent one, we don't have this, and I'll explain this just because we have access to some repeated channels. So this poor illustration here is a repeater tower on top of a mountain or on top of a ridge. That repeater receives, in this case, on the fire primary channel, receives transmissions from a portable radio, and it broadcasts them with a much higher wattage and at a higher elevation. And in the case of law and fire, it broadcasts them all over the county from multiple sites. That's why our sheriff's deputies can be standing right next to us, and they can talk all the way to JEFCOM or to another deputy or police officer in Port Townsend, while we struggle to talk to each other 2 miles away up a trail.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Like when we was Duckabush there a week or so ago, is that pretty much why the deputy did all the talking? Is because he just has way better communication than we did?
No, that was probably more of a
or he knew more.
We only want one person speaking from a scene, and he was on that scene, so he just took command of the comms there.
Is that usually how that works? If there's a deputy there, he'll do it?
Yeah, usually they're not on the scene with us up the trail, though. Usually, so Derek and I kind of reversed positions on that call. Usually he would be back at the trailhead talking to JEFCOM.
Okay.
And I would be up there with y'all.
All right.
But he was the ATV operator, so that's
exactly.
He ended up there, and I ended up sitting in a car. All right, so we have some access to repeater channels. We don't use them a lot, but they'll come up here in a minute. Our portable radios, we have a bunch of them. Some people have them as personally assigned so that they can go straight from home to a call. The rest are in both of our vehicles. The truck has 6, the ambulance has 12 or something. So we have a fair number of them. They're all programmed for you. You don't need to know frequency numbers or anything like that. All you need to know is how to get to the channel you need. So that's what we're going to cover here briefly. And this is what you will usually see for a list of channels on your radio. If you don't hit any other buttons, you'll see 17 channels, and you can scroll through them using one of the knobs. The first 5 channels are state SAR channels, and this is what we're typically operating on, SAR or SAR1. Some people call it state SAR. All of that means channel 1, SAR1. And then there's SAR2, which is a JSAR, usually default channel. We've just kind of standardized on SAR2. And then there are also 3, 4, and 5. Every SAR unit in the state has access to those. A lot of the fire departments have all 5 of those, or at least SAR1 programmed into their radios. And other agencies that we would work with, they have them in their radios as well, at least SAR1. Ideally, they would have all 5, but sometimes, like this last mission, we had to switch to SAR1 instead of SAR2 because the National Park Radio only had SAR1. So we'll adapt to whatever another agency needs. The other frequencies here: Olympic Mountain Rescue, Fire Primary, Fire TAC 2, RedNet. Those are fire channels. Only use them if directed, because we're working with a fire department or in some kind of emergency, you need to contact JEFCOM. Learn, Oscar, only use those if we are directed to. And there are 3 Coast Guard Marine channels, same channels as on a Marine radio. 16, 21 alpha, and 81 alpha. And there are more hidden in our radios too. I'll get into that in a minute. Navy, the Whidbey Island SAR helicopter channel, we rarely use that because it's their chat frequency, but we have at times. Kitsap SAR, rarely used, and then 2 meter Port Townsend. That's what that 2M PTW. That's a ham radio repeater, so you need to have a ham license to use that, except in an extreme emergency. We have, though, 4 other banks of channels, and I just want to show you that these are here. So this one has more fire and other public safety channels for Jefferson County. This next one has more marine channels, including 22 alpha, which is sometimes what the Coast Guard helicopter wants us to go to. And then a bunch of nationwide interoperability channels that we rarely use. The whole public safety apparatus rarely uses. Bank 4 is federal agencies. We do use this on occasion, primarily if we're working in the park. And we would have used this last 2 weeks ago on that call, except that the repeaters are down. So here you'll see in bold, behind a bunch of these Olympic National Park channels, the word repeater. Those are to permit communication all over Olympic National Park. They have to have towers on various points. You can see where they are here. One's on Blue Mountain, one's up at Hurricane Ridge. The one down in Brennan is on Elk Lake. That one is not functioning right now, which is why we couldn't use it the other day. So those are repeated channels. You could speak to their dispatcher in Port Angeles on those frequencies. We rarely use this except if directed, and only when we're working with the National Forest or the National Park on their call and they want us to go to their frequency. A little more in that same bank is the Rainier National Park. Same deal. We rarely operate at Rainier, but they're in our radios just in case we end up over there in mutual aid calls, which has happened before. The final bank is just the 7 weather channels. They're in there by frequency. All you have to do is go to that bank and scroll until you hear a strong signal and it's not in French, unless you speak French and want it in French. And then you can just listen to the weather forecast. Cannot transmit on those channels, obviously, but you can listen. This is our standard radio. I won't belabor anything here. You really need to get your hands on it to learn what the buttons are programmed for, but the 5 banks I just described, note that let's see here. Right here, the bank up and down buttons are these arrows here. They're B and C on the radio. So you can change banks and get to some of those other frequencies. So if you can't find, we have Coast Guard 22 Alpha or Marine 22 Alpha in our radios, and you can't find it by turning the channel knob, which is this guy, then you know that you need to hit B or C and flip through the banks until you find a bank that has those channels in it. Other than that, basic stuff you will learn when you get your hands on it at our May field exercise. So I'm going to run through some radio etiquette things here real quick. This will probably be covered in your base medical training too, but just for sake of saying we told you this, please pay attention to this stuff. Number one, listen before speaking. So if someone else is already on the channel, allow that all to change. Allow a few seconds for everyone to get done speaking and be completely done with their conversation before you key the mic. Second important thing, after you key the mic, pause briefly before starting to count. I'll go into the reason for that later, but it takes a second for everyone else's radio to flip to that channel and listen to you. So just quickly count 1, 2 in your head, and then you can start talking. We use in SAR and in fire, we use something called "Hey you, it's me." So you say the name of who you're calling and then who you are. To add to the confusion, law enforcement around here does it the opposite way. They say, "It's me, hey you," I guess. But anyway, military, fire, the federal agencies, everyone else does this, "Hey you, it's me." So that's what we do. So to give you an example, SAR base, this is ground team 2. So you say first SAR base because that's who you're calling. This is ground team 2. That's who you are. Or if you're team 1 and you want to call team 3, you say team 3 from team 1. It's always the person you're calling first, and then identify yourself. You should get the hang of that in the field. Again, just want to point out that the deputies, when they get on our channel, tend to stick with their way. Sometimes it gets confusing. Just try to do it the "Hey you, it's me" way. Use plain English. We don't use 10 codes. We don't use special codes. We don't even typically use special codes for finding a body. An exception would be as if we're in some kind of media circus and in a missing child and FBI and all that kind of stuff, they might tell us to use some kind of code to keep it quiet. But for the most part, it is plain English. People can scan our channels, but they generally don't. I mean, no one cares to listen to search and rescue all the time. And our frequencies, our radios don't broadcast too far anyway, so they would have to be close to us. There are 2 ways to phonetically spell a word or a license plate or whatever. The one is the law enforcement way, which uses names. The other is the ITU or military way, which uses Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. You should be familiar with one of those, just roughly familiar. No one cares if you say Alpha, Boy, Charlie, David, and bounce back and forth or make up some word, but you should try to stick to one of those 2. We don't use it a whole lot, but on occasion you need to spell something out. I went over this the other day in NAV, but use single digits and decimal to read numbers. So don't say 47, say 47. So 47 degrees, 58 decimal, 895. Not point, not period. It's always decimal for the decimal point in a number. And then use tactical call signs when assigned. Generally, even though we all have our JSAR ID numbers and we'll use those on the air, generally we will assign tactical call signs. So SAR base is the obvious one, or JSAR base. Ground teams get either numbered or lettered, so you might be ground team Alpha or ground team 1. If you're solo, if you're assigned separately from your team, things change up the trail a lot. Personnel reassignments and taskings change a lot when the assignment changes. So sometimes someone ends up apart from their ground team that they were assigned to, and that's when you revert to using your badge number. And you just say JSAR I'm JSAR 128. You can say JSAR 169 or whatever. Emphasize the important things, minimize everything else. Radio channels can get busy, and this is doubly important if you ever find yourself talking on fire or law, but even on our SAR frequencies, emphasize the important things, minimize the stuff that's not. Read back important messages and details. So if someone calls you as a radio relay and says that a rescuer got injured, you don't just say Roger and unclick the push to talk. You would say, I copy that rescuer was injured, has a twisted ankle at the coordinates that you gave me, and you are going to try to splint the injury and move the patient downhill. Whatever they told you, try to read it back. Let them correct what they say. If it's scratchy communications, then really read it back. If you can only hear half of what they say, read it back. Say, I copy that you want us to return to base, and let the ICP confirm that that is in fact what they told you, if you could only hear part of it. Don't need to read back everything though, and that's where minimize the rest comes into play. So if it's just a simple status update, someone says, okay, you don't need to read that back. Just say Roger and move on. Break long messages into multiple parts. We'll talk about how to do that in a second. Don't hold down the push to talk on your radio for longer than ideally like 30 seconds at the most. That would be a really long call. The radio will beep and stop transmitting if you hold it down for 60 seconds, and then you'll have to rekey it. But if you've held the button down that long, you're talking too much without giving people a break. So we'll get to, again, how to do that in a second. We don't say over and out, or come in. Anything that sounded cool in a movie, we don't do it. Roger or received or a copy, all of those are acceptable ways to acknowledge a message rather than 10-4. Just use some plain language. Received is probably most common here, especially on law enforcement people. Ways to answer if you're asked for your team's status. One is just to say ops normal. Operations are normal. No problems, nothing to report, ops normal. More verbose way is to say team 1 is at 5,400 feet, ops normal, we're continuing. That's about as verbose as you want to be on a status check of your team. So you're giving your elevation. Say you're on a trail, you say we're at 5,400 feet. Base can look at the map and see where that trail hits 5,400 feet and figure out roughly where you are. They know ops are normal, so you have no problems or anything to report, and you're continuing, which means you're still moving along with your assignment, whether that's to go further up the trail or take the patient down or whatever. So no need to speak too long when you're asked for your status. Just respond and let base know that everything's okay. If people say break, it means that they're done talking to you and they're going to call another station. So we'll get to that in radio relay a second here. But also is another pro word that means I have more to say after this message. So that is how you break a long message into multiple parts. So if you got a lot to say, broadcast a little bit of it, and then say also, and let go of the mic. And let the base or whoever you're calling answer you and say, okay, I got that. Go ahead with also, and then you can keep talking. I'm not expecting you to get the hang of all this right now, but just recognize when those things happen in the field, and you'll see that we're doing them on purpose. I already kind of covered this. Think before you key your mic, but that'll come with time. Just try the first few times that you grab the mic to run through it in your head first before you key the mic. You'll minimize the amount of error that you take up, and you'll feel less stupid when you're done. Assume people are listening. I said people don't scan us very often, but if they're close and they're interested, they might. So it's not a private channel. Nothing's encrypted or secret or scrambled or even hard to listen to. So assume someone's hearing you. A little bit more on what we do to operate where with these low power radios and hills and valleys and ridges. We're nearly almost always at the margins. We can radio check all we want right at base there, but as soon as someone walks for a few minutes, it starts getting scratchy. That said, we manage to operate over long distances, and we do it in a couple ways. One is by moving around, finding a good place for communicating. There are some places, known places up our common trails, where if we put a radio there, sometimes if we hang an antenna in a tree there, or we hang the radio itself in a tree, we can talk just fine back to base. If we're 5 feet away from that spot or 20 feet away from that spot, or the radio's on our belt or in our pack, we can't talk to them. So move around, find a good place for communicating, and don't move. Leave the radio there or leave a radio operator there. Make sure the antenna's on tight. Turn your body so that your body is not between your radio and who you're talking to, or better yet, take it out of your pack or off your belt or out of your holster or whatever and hold it above your head. It makes a significant difference, improvement, and the reason is because the human body is so much water content, and radio waves in our frequencies don't go through water very well. We also have some roll-up antennas. We use those on that recent mission. So those can be hung off your pack while you're moving, or they can be strung up in a tree for best results. You can't bring it up 100 feet, but we can get it 20 feet in the tree or whatever and connect it to one of our portable radios. It helps a lot. The other thing we do is put someone in the middle. So this happens at Lena Lake is the best example I have for you. There's a rock face above the lower switchbacks. I think it's in the middle of the upper 3 switchbacks. There's a rock face where if you stand there with the radio, and there's a nice pull-out area from the side of the trail to work on. If you stand there, you can speak to rescuers at the lower Lena Lake. You can speak most of the way up to upper Lena Lake, and you could speak all the way down to base. Without someone there, none of these people can communicate. So if we go up there, that's where we put a radio relay. A radio relay, it's one reason that you pack extra layers and maybe a stove, because you're going to be bored and cold. Radio relay just sits there and relays traffic. It's like a human radio repeater. They have some drawbacks establishing a radio relay. We can't really get around using it, but there are some drawbacks. And one of those is that the information can be changed. Keep that in mind if you're assigned to be a radio relay. Try not to change what someone told you when you relay it to the other party. Don't let it become like a game of telephone where the instructions get garbled or you put your own spin on it and the intention of the person who called you with that message gets changed in your hands. Don't let that happen. Another drawback is everything has to be said twice, although there's kind of a way around that, but it can make the radio channel really busy. And a final drawback is that the radio relay is the only one who can hear everyone. So sometimes the relay will hear both ends of the communication chain start talking at the same time. It just happens. There's no way around it because base can't hear the people at Lena Lake. Lena Lake people can't hear base. The radio relay can hear both of them, and so it can garble traffic. The best practice that fixes a lot of that is to use readbacks. We can train on this in the field, but in general, I mentioned earlier that you repeat back or read back to the person who called you important information. So for the scenario down at the bottom of the page here, Team 2 is calling the radio relay. And so Team 2 says, relay, this is Team 2, we have located the subject. The relay, instead of just saying Roger and then calling base with that information, says instead, Team 2, relay copies that you have located subject. Break. That's a break word to say, I'm done talking to Team 2, I'm going to talk to base now. So break, base from relay, do you copy? Base copies. It doesn't need to be said again because the relay already said that message back to team 2 as part of the readback, and base heard that. So using readbacks when you're a radio relay make things flow a lot better. And you get the hang of it when you get yourself in that situation. Okay. All right, any questions about radios or comms?